session that Dirk had put together, and I very much appreciate the thought and the idea behind this. I'm going to go through and introduce folks right now so I don't have to reintroduce them later, although I suspect just about everybody up here you know as I go through that. Their bios are in your program, so I'm not going to read all of those bios, but I am just going to recognize them and thank them for being here right now. Directly behind, or let me start on the very end, and then I'll come back to Ricky. Mr. Graham Moore, who you just heard from. He graciously agreed to stick around for the panel discussion. Hopefully you found his presentation informative. I can tell you from those of us who have been working for the past several months on trying to get the idea of a regional water authority onto paper, again, Mr. Moore has been extremely helpful in getting us to where we are today. So thank him. I want to say thank to him again for sticking around. Next to him is, again, no stranger to this room, Representative Brad Buckley. Representative Buckley, I very much appreciate your presence here today, your interest in this issue in particular. We've had several discussions already with Representative Buckley, and he has been very supportive of what we're doing, and we'll look forward to some comments that he's got here in just a few minutes. Next to him is our Senator, Senator Pete Flores. Senator, thank you also for being here. Likewise, we've had several discussions, and I want to say, I should mention quickly, they may recognize them when they get an opportunity to say something, but they may have some staff here. I know we recognized Will, who was earlier, who is here from Senator Flores' office. Jessica here today, or somebody from your, Sarah is here from Representative Buckley's office. I want to say thanks to both of you for your staff and the work that they do. They have been outstanding and extremely helpful to us as we've been through this process, so thank you very much for that. And then finally, Ricky Garrett, General Manager for WCID number 1. I got to admit, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. When in Graham's slide presentation, one of the slides up there said, was talking about, I don't know if it was political concerns. I think it was on the political concerns section of the slides. And he said one of the concerns was city of San Marcos, and then he had an image there of a gorilla sitting on a table. I thought of Ricky when I saw that slide. Because, that may not be the image you have of Ricky, but WCID number 1, I think, has over 300,000 or so, 300,000, 350,000, something, I think, last time I looked, ultimate inline water users. They are the largest water purveyor in the region. So they are that gorilla in the room in one sense. But Ricky has been extremely helpful, extremely easy to work with, and an extremely integral part of the discussions as we go forward, as we talk about this water alliance for Central Texas. So what I've asked him to do is just kind of lead this off in terms of the panel. He's got a few slides just to zero in a little bit more on what we're calling the Central Texas Water Alliance, which is the name for the water authority that we're proposing. But I'll let him lead that off. When he finishes, then I've got some questions, just a couple of questions I'll probably ask of each panel member, and then we're going to open it up to the audience and let y'all have an opportunity to have questions. We have 2 people who are going to be having microphones. I don't remember exactly where they are, but they'll stand up at the appropriate time, and they'll have a microphone in their hand. So when we get to that part, I'll ask you just to raise your hand, and the microphone will come to you at that time. All right? So without further ado, Ricky, if you'd start us off.
Thank you, Judge. Appreciate that. Appreciate the remarks, and I wish I did resemble a bigger gorilla. I'm just not that guy. I do want to say how glad I am to be here today. I've had the good fortune to meet most everybody in this room in some form or fashion. In the process of gathering support letters and going to different board meetings, it was a real pleasure getting out and talking with you and meeting with you. So with that, I'm just going to have a few minutes here. I'm not going to take much of your time. I'm in the way of some bigger speakers up here, but I am fully vested in this effort because I've spent 30 8 years roughly of my career in water supply and water treatment business. And in 2021 was the first time I had a master plan that the results showed that we had a little bit more water need than we had water supply. And the reason for that is because of all the planning that and efforts that went into the lake system. And we've lived off that since then. I've lived off that my whole life. But those leaders that got Lake Belton, Lake Steelhouse, Lake Waco, all those lake systems in place, we've all lived off that. And the fact is we can't do that any longer. And so the efforts like this have to be successful for us. And so anyway, with no further messing around here. So this is our service area. As Judge mentioned, we have a little over 300,000 population served. We go all the way from Belton to the east side to Coppers Cove in Coryell County. We also serve Fort Cavazos, which is originally why we were formed, and that's another story I'd be glad to talk about at another time. We do have, of those precincts that were shown, we do have elected members, and I think we had a board member that came in late and wasn't introduced. Ricky Wilson is here from our board. Ricky's in the back, so good to have him here. So with all the different interests and priorities in society, fire, police, security, they're all very important. But if you don't have water, you can't have those things. And water is something that we always take for granted because we always have been able to. In the last 60, 70 years, if you lived in Central Texas, it is something you could have taken for granted if you had surface water. And that's not our future anymore, at least not in the next coming decades. This, for us, for our entity, this is where our shortfall projects to show. And what we do, how these numbers were aggregated is I have 8 wholesale customers. And at each master plan we do, we meet with our customers and say, this is what your last projection showed. This is what the state water plan shows. Do you agree with this? And sometimes we adjust it a little more aggressive, sometimes a little less aggressive than what the state showed. But that's how we evolve this. So this is a cumulative needs for all the customers that I serve for WCID1. And it shows around 2050 we're going to cross that mark from what we need versus what we have. That horizontal line is we have 62,509 acre feet contracted through Brazos River Authority. We are the largest municipal water customer in the Brazos River Authority basin. I believe that's still correct. Is that? I see Brad shaking his head. Brad's the guy on that. But we've enjoyed a great relationship and continue to enjoy a great relationship with Brazos River Authority. And I will say this before I close out, is we intend for that relationship to only grow in nature should this effort be successful, because we rely on them and will continue to rely on them. And we hope that what we're doing could be more of an integral part of the state water plan that they're charged with facilitating. So to that end, I hope this works well for all involved. These next bullets is something that we could go into detail on, but I'm not going to read through these. Some of you that are on the boards and the water supply corporations that we've talked with and had meetings with, these bullets will look familiar. So it's all these things you got to do is something that Graham and his team went through before. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. For us, we're not proposing any taxes. There's no tax funding in what we're proposing here. It would all be based on water volumes and very similar to how Graham is set up. In fact, we found Graham's entity pretty early on in our discussions, and we just couldn't find a whole lot that we didn't like about how they went forward. And so I was so glad that he could make it here and present to us today, because I think we're going to try to use his example in a lot of ways. And this is in our beliefs. I believe I can speak for Judge Blackburn and Dirk Aaron, myself, and some others in the room. This is what we feel like is the vehicle that can allow us to meet our water needs in the future and continue to grow and prosper and get to a point where we take water for granted again, at least for a while, for a generation or two, hopefully. And then it might be somebody else's, grandsons, grandkids that have to be in this role that are doing the work. And last thing, I promise this is the last thing. I keep saying that, but this is if we get full, if everyone in this room today said, yes, let's do that right now, that we're not done. I mean, we're just starting. And like Judge Blackburn said, it's not a silver bullet, and there's a lot of tough decisions, and none of it is going to be cheap, none of it. But it's the new reality that we've got to get with, and it is what it is. But we're starting here, and I'm just glad to be a part of it. So thank y'all for your time.
Thank you, Ricky. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I got a few questions that I'm going to ask, and I'll give each of the folks up here an opportunity to make any remarks that they'd like to make just in general as I direct questions to them also. So I would encourage them to do that, so don't feel constrained necessarily by the question. First question I'd like to address to our two state legislators up here is what sort of water issues, if any, have you been hearing or seeing from either the constituents in your respective districts and service areas, or what comes across your desk from the legislative standpoint in terms of water issues, both on a statewide basis, and then if you can localize that in terms of something that may be specific to our local region. And Senator, I'll let you go first.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you all for having me here today, and it's great to see this proactive outpouring here in Bell County. That's something that's very important, as you mentioned, sir. Oftentimes we're very reactive, and of course that's the reason why in our infrastructure needs across the state, locally and across the state, are way behind in water infrastructure, and so that's this type of initiative is extremely important. People are moving, as Governor Abbott says, about 1,400 people a day are moving into our state. I think you can see that. We can all see that every day driving on the interstate or in our towns. It's just a lot more crowded. I probably do about 1,000 miles a week, and there's almost nowhere I can go in the district that is just not crowded, even way out in the country. It's just, well, who can blame people who wanted to come to Texas? But they don't bring their own water, and they don't bring their own infrastructure, and they don't bring their own education, and we have to continue to proactively provide for that. Water issues, especially around the urban areas in the district that I represent. On the western side of the district, we have massive growth with the subdivisions. In Medina County, in Bandera County, Atascosa County, all in the hill country counties, it's just explosive, the amount of homes being built. Of course, they're all putting straws into the same tub of water, if you will, and combined with the drought, where everybody's feeling the issues. The Highland Lakes just can't support that alone. The lake systems here can't support that alone, but the Edwards Aquifer, the Wilcox, that they're being strained by this explosive growth, so that's the one thing that's happening, is how do we continue to provide water resources for the expansive growth in the district without depleting our existing water resources. From a state perspective, I serve on Ag, Rural Affairs and Water Committee in the Senate, and it's of course, water being one of the biggest issues. We just passed $1 billion. You all just approved $1 billion for water infrastructure and other initiatives. But we'll be looking at Senator Perry, who's absolutely a treasure for us to have. And I'm not just saying that because, he's the chairman, but he's the man knows his stuff. And we'll be looking at legislation coming in this upcoming session to be able to deal proactively going not only a couple of generations, but 40, 50 years into the future by pretty much designing how we look at water, how we pay for water, and looking at all the oceans of water that are beneath our state that we're currently not accessing because of expense and technology, and also salt water, which we have a lot of, but the technology exists there as well. But it's expensive, including the use of nuclear plants, low-grade uranium plants. The Navy's been using them for years on their ships. But it can be used to power desalination plants and extraction plants all over as we continue to meet this need. Eventually, it's going to get to whether the expense is going to be, well, we need it. You don't have the water, you don't have quality of life. People won't come here. You can't live anywhere. So I along with my colleagues in the House, I'm sure we'll be working very closely to be able to meet current and present needs as effectively and efficiently as possible.
Senator, Representative?
Well, first of all, to echo Senator Flores, thanks so much for the invitation to be here. There's nothing more important that you can really work on, I believe, as a state representative is understanding sort of the basic needs of your community. But then also being a representative that understands that and tries to go about it. And today with us is a former member of the legislature that was a mentor of mine of showing me how to represent a district and to really how to get things done in the Texas House. And Lyle Larson is here. Lyle, it's good to see you. My first session when I had what turned out to be what I thought was just a little water bill, turned out to be a little controversial, and Lyle really helped me do what I needed to do for my constituents, and I will be forever grateful for that. So it's really good to see you. What comes across my desk and when I'm at the coffee shops and everywhere I go around Bell County is, man, there are a lot of people moving here, and where are we going to get the water? It's really that simple. The first issue I always hear about is one that impacts where I live and where I ranch is groundwater, and that is our overtaxed Middle Trinity Aquifer. And whether or not where that aquifer is managed and where it is not managed, the reality is it's impacting all of us. So that is a primary issue. The second issue is the amount of growth and the amount of jobs being created just to the south of us, and then more jobs being created here in Bell County because of that. And the folks that are going to live here will be our neighbors very soon. How are we really going to meet those needs, not for next year or 10 years, but 30, 40, and 50 years in the future? I'm a grandfather now. I see the whole world through different eyes than I did simply probably 5 years ago. And I think that's what's really on the hearts and minds of folks in Bell County. And one of the things I've talked about over the last 3 or 4 years was we've always kind of looked at water, I think, well, there's some big things going on down south, and our neighbors are doing this, and this neighbor's doing that. And we've had some, let's just say some disagreements. Now's the time to put all those disagreements behind us, and it's time to chart a new future. And that is really, and I really want to commend Ricky and Judge Blackburn and Dirk for really taking that to heart, to understand that really Bell County and our neighbors around us, we will either chart our own future for water or we won't. And this is the time to do that. And I think what the Water Alliance and what that could do for us in the future, it really solves and answers a lot of the questions that constituents ask you at church and at the coffee shop and at my vet clinic, is that they want organized and concerted planning. They want all the entities working together. And I think they also understand that it's going to be expensive. But we can certainly tackle these things together and position ourselves to be in a better position, if you will, to access some of the things that the state is doing to provide resources for finding new water. And that's what we need. So I look forward to continue working on that issue. It is a fundamental issue of government. You can talk about what government should do and shouldn't do and whatever. This is damn sure one of them. And so I'm really excited about this and look forward to moving forward with it. And I appreciate Senator Flores helping me on the other side of the Pink Dome.
Thank you, Representative. Let me do a quick follow-up for both of you on that. And I don't know that we've specifically said it yet today, but both Senator Flores and Representative Buckley have agreed to carry a bill that's being drafted as we speak. And I just can't tell you how much we appreciate that going forward. So thank you to both of them for being willing to do that and to work with us, and of course their staffs. It's going to be an effort. So along those lines, would each of you sort of address what sort of obstacles or issues or concerns or potholes or speed bumps we might anticipate for legislation that would create a water authority? I mean, what kinds of things should we be on the lookout for? What kind of things are you going to be trying to be looking out for and assisting in getting a bill passed? All right, Representative.
Well, I mean, one of the things, this will be my fourth term, and one of the things I've learned is that it doesn't matter what you do in the legislature. The system is designed to be a grind. It's designed to kill bills, not pass bills. And, you know, what I've learned is I could file a bill yesterday, which was the first day you could file, that says the sky is blue, and by today there'll be 9 people asking, what do you really mean by that? That's how detailed the analysis will be. And anytime we talk about a precious resource like water, ears are going to prick up. And folks are going to look all around the state, all of our neighbors and those that are our neighbors' neighbors. Everyone's going to be looking, because what we have, we only have, certain opportunities and things. So we know that will be the case. And so my job would be to make sure that my colleagues that represent their constituents in all the areas around me understand what we're doing, and that we were doing this not to the detriment of anyone else, but for the benefit, I believe, of setting forth and continuing a model of having effective policy and effective partnerships to make sure we have more water available for Central Texas. The real nuts and bolts of it, this will be a local bill. Just a simple local bill there is no such thing. There are so many things that can go into whether or not a local bill makes it through the local and consent calendar in the House, things that have nothing to do with water. It may be things that people don't like Brad Buckley, or they don't like the bill that's behind Brad Buckley's bill, or they don't like, I mean, I have just seen things that I never thought I'd see. But my job is to make sure we have those relationships, that we sort of grease the skids, if you will, to try to get this bill to the other end. And I think it's entirely possible, or we wouldn't attempt it. But the idea that this will just be a simple local bill, I think is a little short-sighted, because it won't be. Anytime something has to do with water, it will get attention, and it'll be my job to make sure that my colleagues understand exactly what we're doing. And of course, then on the other side, it'll be in the able hands of Senator Flores to basically work the same process, but with his colleagues.
Senator?
Oh, thank you. And you're exactly right, Representative. You just never know, what comes out at the end. But what I do know is that what I would need is that you all approach this as a united front. And if there's any disagreements amongst you in this room about how this should happen, you hash it out now, and not in front of a committee, if we get it to committee, because you will kill it. So the more you come in as a united front, as we do our work to get this to committee, the easier it'll be. Because I'm going to tell you something. To get it to committee, I got to convince the committee chairman that this is something that we need, that it's a local bill, but that's not going to affect adversely the rest of the state. And then I have to convince the lieutenant governor that this is a good bill, So once I get it there, once I get the hearing, once Senator Perry says, okay, we're going to hear it, and Lieutenant Governor says, okay, that sounds good, I don't need it to have a fractured coalition from Bell County say, well, we want this, or we want that, and we don't like it because of this. Hash that out before we get there, please, so that we can get this bill through. And hopefully I'll get it unanimously through our committee, and it'll go to local and uncontested in the Senate and head out to the House. And or if the House, if Brad gets it before me. And so that's the one thing that I see a lot that happens when we have local bills is, there's a bill right now being talked about by the chiefs of police that half of the chief of police like it and the other half of them don't, but yet they want the bill filed. And so I tell them the same thing. When you all are together, come see me. So that's probably the main thing is this group, this meeting today. This is great where we can all gather and where you can, cuss or discuss it. But let's, at the end of the day, what we got right now, the bill is in Ledge Council, which means it's being written. So that's the time for us to hear, Representative Ida, to hear, okay, what tweaks do we need to make, and we can get it in Ledge Council written, hopefully written in before we can get it out. And so we can make this process as efficiently as possible. There's 1,400 bills filed yesterday, and there's probably going to be 3,000 more before the session is over. So, but this is a priority of ours. We represent you. This is what you want. And so we're going to do our best to use all of our relationships to make it happen. We just need to do it together. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, high level, how that works.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Representative. All right, so what I heard from both of them is this will be done and it's easy. So write all that down. They promised they would get it passed. That's what I heard. Again, thank you for those comments and for the work that you're going to do in your staff. Graham, in your presentation, you talked about lots of things that were super helpful for us in terms of how we're working our way through this process also. And I think it was on one of your slides, but could you maybe highlight or elaborate on when the alliance was formed and you moved into water authority status, what was the first thing you did? What was the first thing that the authority did?
Well, I think the first part that was most important to us was really having the political will to come together and forge everybody together. And I think you are light years ahead of where we were 20 years ago through this forum and through some of the other discussions you're already having to make that move and push that forward. To me, that was the biggest obstacle we had 20 years ago, was the desire to work together and find that need to come together and make that happen. And so finding the political will from the council members, from the Water Supply Corporation boards, those that are going to be paying the bills at the end of the day, to me was kind of the key aspect. So I'm heartened as somebody that is just watching this from the outside, and that you're already making great strides towards that through the idea that you've already got that whole list of entities that have decided they want to come together and work together to form a water authority, and they've made that determination. And so I think that is the first and really the hardest step, in my view, for our formation, was to get that desire in place. And it sounds like you're in good shape there.
Thank you, Graham. Ricky, what if we can get the water authority legislation passed and formed, what do you think would be maybe the first thing that our water alliance would do?
I would suggest that we would commission a regional supply study so that we could, through some very detailed analytics, determine exactly what our water need and how to apportion that cost and get it to where it's needed.
One of the slides, again, that Graham had up there, and one of the quotes that I wrote down on the sheet when he got there, was that they determined early on, in terms of objectives, that they were better off working together than working separately. And from my perspective, I think that's what we have been doing for decades, and some have done better than others. There's no doubt about that. But the idea of working separately for the future decades to come up with, again, more water to serve more people is probably not the only model that we should be entrusted to. So the Water Authority, from my perspective, and I think from those that have been working on this for the past several months and years, is that the collective, the collaboration, and the framework for that, while not deterring or eliminating at all autonomy from individual entities, but putting the power of all of those entities in one place to leverage is a very, very good strategy for helping us move forward. And that's the idea behind this authority. It's not to take away anybody's authority or autonomy. It's simply to leverage that so that we can collectively do more. Heard it said in one of our discussions with that we had a couple of weeks or so ago. We talked about, you know, everybody's in the same boat, or at least everybody who's growing is in the same boat. We all need more water, and if we continue to do what we've been doing in the past, then we're going to end up with dozens and dozens and dozens of pipelines heading east to bring water west. And is that the most efficient, best way for the ratepayers to provide for the growth or to meet the growth and development that's occurring? Wouldn't it be better to have fewer pipelines where costs are shared and efficiencies are gained? And that's what a water authority is attempting to do. You should have on your tables a one-pager. If you don't have that, let somebody know before you leave and we'll get it to you. But it says Regional Water Supply Entity for Central Texas, the Central Texas Water Alliance. That one-pager is front and back, and it just lays out in one page a lot of ideas, a lot of concepts and thoughts about why and what. I'd say the what is probably light on the one-pager because we're still working on the whats. But the why is really captured in Graham's slide, I think. It's just that we're better off together. We're better off working together. That's the why. That's the why. All right. At this time, certainly let the panel, if they've got any additional comments they'd like to make or remarks, but I'm going to open it up for some questions at this time, and we'll try to stay on time so we don't defer lunch. All right. So if you've got a question, there's a microphone in the back. There's a microphone in the front. If you'll just raise your hand, and we'll try to address. I see one far right. See one in the center. And welcome. And if you could, if you don't mind, if you'd state if you'd state your name and if you're with an entity or representing an entity, state that entity that you're representing. And if you're a private citizen, private landowner, just say that. I want to say that for the benefit of the panel up here, especially our state legislators. When I began the morning this morning, I polled the room and asked, okay, how many people are here from governmental entities? How many people are here from water purveyors? Our state legislators may not be surprised at this at all, but the majority of people in this room are private citizens and private landowners. That's the majority of the folks here, and I applaud them for being here. So if you would, let us know who you are in that capacity, and that will help. Go ahead.
This is extraordinary because normally Bill speaks for everybody, but he's allowing me to speak today, so women power. I am a private citizen, as is my wonderful husband here. We are actually neighbors of Representative Brad Buckley in Salado. And thank you so much for your service and congratulations on your recent election. We personally voted for you. That's private notice, but we're just letting you know. We are here because we are transplants like our senator here. We came from another state to Texas 35 years ago and proudly came as ranchers and farmers from California. No stoning allowed. We are good Californians. And we came here with the idea that we would continue our children, our grandchildren, the legacy of farming and ranching. So we've been doing it for his life, my life, and we continue to do it, and we plan on continuing the 3 to 5 year generation of farming, ranching, and wildlife preservation. So when I heard the wonderful progress here, that the decreasing demand for farmland and increasing municipal demand, it kind of puts us on alert. So there's going to be a decrease to farmland water access and an increase to municipals as the current neighbors of Mustang Springs, how does the Regional Water Authority take farm ranching, wildlife preserve and into consideration? Because we hear loud and clear that this is going to be equitable. Sometimes equitable is thrown around in politics to mean equitable to you, but not to you.
Everybody's looking at each other.
Yeah.
I'll respond to that, but I'll let Representative or the Senator go first, and
Sure.
we'll see.
All right. Howdy, neighbors. Good to see you. The way that I look at when you plan for growth, it's going to be obviously the increase in population that's going to drive the demand, right? But in my mind, the way I viewed it, it's in no way mutually exclusive of property rights and folks that own property doing with that property what they want to do with it. And so I think it's because I'm just like you. I want to keep what I have in young sport and the cows and the ranching activity to do that and pass it on to my kids. But we do know that we are struggling with groundwater right now. And so if a water authority or planning or better regional planning can bring a different water source and new water to that, to me it may be in terms be a necessity for some of the growth that's going to occur, but it also doesn't exclude the traditional usage of that land. And I think that will tend to improve our situation where we live, because we know we've got a problem, and that's what we've been trying to get at. And I think this is a step to make that problem more known to more people and to be involved in those discussions. I would rather be at the table. What is it if you're not at the table, you're on the menu? I mean, that's where I see this being a really good forum for that, so that everyone's unique property rights and what they'd like to do with their property can be honored, and the problems we're having as rural landowners that ranch and want to preserve it will be heard as well.
Anyone else? Senator?
Well, and thank you for that. Texas is about 96% privately owned. And I don't know if you knew that, but as a result, property rights and landowners in Texas are top priority. And then they also have we passed you the voters passed a constitutional amendment guaranteeing it's a constitutional right to farm and ranch in Texas. So that is also guaranteed by our Constitution. So it puts you at the as a landowner and as a rancher and a farmer, pretty high profile. So any discussion about a distribution of water resources within an area, it's incumbent upon you by being here and also any associations you may belong to. I know Farm Bureau's big into it, the cattle raisers, to making sure that they have that seat at the table. Then you have the proper water allotments when it comes down to that. So thank you for your comments.
Here's what I would add. You remember the short answer to your question, in my view, is more water. That's the short answer. We got to have more water. The longer answer is, do you remember that bar graph I showed you in my presentation this morning? And I showed you from 2020 to 2050. I didn't show you 2020 backwards. But you remember in that bar graph, there was red and there was green, right? The green was livestock or ag. The red was municipal use. And you remember on the municipal use, the projected water use going forward was getting bigger, 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 bigger because the population is growing. And you remember on the livestock or on the ag use, it was dropping as we go forward. If I showed you that graph backwards, what do you think it would show? It would show both of those going up. So if we look back at 2000, 2010, the ag use was also on a slight tick up also. So both of them were going up. But in the new water plan, 2022, and we're working on the next water plan right now, as a matter of fact. We met last week, the board met last week to talk about that. We talked about water management strategies in particular. But in the new water plan, in the current water plan, And you remember the quote I had in there from the State Water Plan? It said, one of the strategies for meeting all these water needs that we have is the transfer of those water rights, or the transfer of that water. I'm not saying, I think everything that was listed in that slide, everything that's listed in the State Water Plan, all of that has to be done in some degree, in some shape, form, or fashion. But what I also highlighted this morning was, I think we are over-relying on things like transfer of water rights. I don't know that a ton of people are going to be giving up water going forward. So I think there may be a little bit of an over-reliance for that as a water strategy to meet new demand. And I also think, as I said this morning, conservation may be overly reliant in the plan also. So how do you address those? You address those by getting more water. You need more water. The water authority that we're talking about here, the Alliance, is intended to be a vehicle by which we can go do that. And I agree with Ricky's comments earlier. I think one of the first things the authority needs to do if it gets stood up is take all of the data and all of the analysis that we've got and regionalize that for us. It's on a state level right now, and you can go through and mine that and see a whole lot of information, but we really haven't crystallized that for our region. So there's numbers in there about what Bluebonnet water supply is going to need for the next 30, 40 years, what they say they need, what Central Texas water supply is going to need, what the city of Killeen is going to need, what the city of, I mean, you can go through all of them, and that information is in there. But the strategy, but refining that and crystallizing that so that we know, okay, how is that going to work? How are we going to meet those needs? And are the water strategies that those entities have identified in the plan, are they feasible? Are they realistic? And then a lot of the feasibility depends on funding, money. And that's where, again, I think a regional water authority can assist in leveraging and accessing state funds in particular. And I'm going to get a plug in right now for the Texas Water Development Board, who you'll hear from later today. We have a representative here from the Water Development Board. But there's a ton, and I think Graham can, he highlighted or mentioned this in his presentation, but a lot of the infrastructure that they're building and have built, I think relied fairly heavily on some state funding. Well, they were able to access that state funding because they were a regional water authority. It's funding that an individual water supply corporation, for example, might not have the capacity or the ability to access. But when you aggregate, you get access. And so that's the long answer to, we got to get more water. That's what we got to do. I think there was a question that's this direction. Yes?
Good evening, or good morning still. So this will not, this is for Mr. Moore pretty much specifically. So this is not going to be, you didn't have.
Can you tell us who you are?
Oh, sorry, Sandra Blankenship, WCID #1.
Okay.
Secretary. Mr. Moore, so in the formation of the Alliance, it was not a taxing entity on your end, correct?
That's correct.
So who funded it? Which entities funded it? How long did it take you to actually get this together?
So our sponsors have funded 100% of our efforts. And basically that goes back to their water rates that their users pay on a monthly basis. So that's the cities of San Marcos, Kyle, Buda, and the other special utility districts that I listed. All of those groups have supported us 100% of the way through our water supply contract, and they make annual contributions to us that basically boil down to their water rights payments from their utility bills every month. So there's no taxing. We don't have any taxing authority. Lord knows we don't want any taxing authority. That's a whole nother kettle of fish to have to deal with. In terms of how long did it take us to form, it really took us about 2 years to bring everybody together and get a stable structure together that we could move forward with. And then from that time, we kind of set a time frame in mind as to when we needed the new water supply and structured our planning, engineering, construction around that timeline. But it took us about 2 years really to get fully organized and structured and able to move forward.
Thank you, sir. We have another question. Yes, sir. Behind you. There's the mic. There you go. Your
thank
name and who you're representing.
John Asbury, representing only myself, Temple, Texas. Over the past 2 decades, both the Trinity Aquifer and the Carrizo-Wilcox have continued to fall in their aquifer levels. And at this point, it looks like they're going to continue to fall for a long period of time. The question is more for our grandchildren than it is for us. And this spring, we had a very unusual water event. Early on, you could walk across Lake Belton and just barely get your feet muddy. By the end of May, you couldn't launch your boat because the water was too high at that point. And Lake Belton, Lake Stillhouse, Lake Whitney, and Lake Waco were way above their conservation levels at that point. They had to release water to bring it back down to the conservation level. The total amount of water they had to release was 800,000 acre-feet of water to get it back down to the conservation level at that point. During that time, all that water went to the Gulf of Mexico. We had not in place any procedure to recharge the aquifer with that excess water at this point. That was water in our backyard. That was water that was going to the Gulf of Mexico, more than meet all the ecological requirements of the Brazos River at this point. We are going to take new water for this area out of the Carrizo aquifer, but it's falling. And sooner or later, it's going to finally diminish, not in our lifetime, but our grandchildren's lifetime. So the question is, what do we do for the nice events when we have excess water to harvest that water to put in the aquifer? Thank you.
Great question. Ricky, you want to tackle that first?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. So I agree 100% that when we're in times of plenty, that's exactly what we need to be doing, is diverting from those lakes when they're above conservation level. We've been fortunate that through Dirk and his work in City of Temple and the well that they found, that there's been information about the lower Trinity, the Houston, that proves it's a suitable aquifer for storage. And while we couldn't have injected 800,000 acre feet, we could have injected several thousand acre feet, probably around 20 or 30,000 acre feet in this one event that you reference. And I think aquifer storage and recovery, I think conservation, we need to do those things. ASR is we're continuing a phase on Fort Cavazo through Brian Dosa's leadership and direction there. That's going to help make them more resilient in times of drought and also under times of an emergency. That where they're looking at the aquifer, it's not as large as what we would need as a water authority, but what exists on the east side of I-35 in the lower Trinity is large enough to be a pretty good conservation reserve for all of us. And so ASR, along with other conservation efforts, need to be front and center with any kind of funding request to show that we're doing the best we can with what we've got before we're asking for anything else.
Yeah, and I would echo those comments. Bell County, WCID, number 1, Clearwater. I'm going to leave somebody else out, but there were several entities that participated in an aquifer storage and recovery study not too long ago to try and identify, okay, can we do that in this area? And if so, where can we do that? And then turn that over to the entities that might be able to do something about that. And as Ricky mentioned, Fort Cavazos was one of the sites, and they're active and going on that issue. They're moving out on it. The City of Temple is also moving out on that issue also. It's a strategy. Y'all will tire of me saying this over the next several years, I suspect, but there are no silver bullets here, and there are no speeding bullets. We've got to do all of these things to meet the water needs going forward, not one, and all of these things take time. Nothing happens overnight, which is why it's imperative that we do things now, because it's that time. It's a multi-generational inflection point in terms of water for our area. All right, I think I'm getting the hook, but we have time for one more question. Yes? I think whoever's got the, I don't know who's got the microphone. Yes, sir.
Dean Carroll, private landowner and with the ACA. My question really relates to water. There's only a few ways you get water: surface water, rainwater collection, or groundwater. What type of authority would the organization, the Alliance, have on groundwater in places where there is no regulation? And also in reference to the previous question, you need a Class 5 well to put the water in the ground, which, once it's in the ground, if there aren't regulations, it's anybody's grab.
Graham, could you address that from your Alliance standpoint?
Sure. We have no regulatory authority over groundwater whatsoever. So we have to work cooperatively with the local groundwater conservation districts in order to permit the use. So we are not a regulating entity. We are a wholesale water provider that goes to those districts. Goes to those districts to get the permits to move the water where we need it, but we have no regulatory authority.
I think and this is the last comment, I'm told we have to stop here, but what I would highlight and underscore on the Water Authority is one of the points that that Graham just made. It's a collaborative, cooperative, voluntary group or framework to work in. There is no intent by the authority to supersede or to overseed anybody's autonomy when it comes to any of those permits or any of those processes. The idea is to collaborate and get things done voluntarily and then aggregate. So there are still issues. You still got to work together. It's still a process. All right. Do we have?
Thank you. Charlie Christian, a private landowner in Salado. I want to say thank you to Mr. Flores and Mr. Buckley for being here and for your support to the state. If you have, Mr. Buckley mentioned a pool of water, the Trinity, and you got half of it being managed, and half of it's being managed properly. Mr. Flores mentioned a lot of straws going down, sucking out the water. At what point does the state step in and say, half of that needs to be managed a little better if it's not going to happen on its own?
Well, I'll go first, and then Senator can, if that's okay. Well, first of all, thank you for your question. Currently now the groundwater conservation management stops at county lines, and at least where we're organized. And of course, the aquifer doesn't. And so what we've tried to do in the past is simply apply the science throughout the aquifer, because what happens across that line impacts you and me and everybody else, right? So, I mean, I think that, and I know that on the Senate side for sure that Senator Perry has talked about sort of, a different way to manage groundwater. But I think at some point, what happens is that when an aquifer becomes depleted and those dependent on it are being limited and it's impacting their lives, it changes the discussion. And then everybody realizes that water needs to be managed, because it is a shared resource that does not know where the county line is. And as that thing draws down, it impacts my place, your place, and everybody else's, and that's a problem. And so that is certainly something that needs to be addressed. And I think we just need to recognize what the science is telling us.
Well, I don't think I can say any better than you did, but nothing gets folks' attention more than when that well goes dry. And then, or they say, well, now all of us have to go deeper, and then it goes dry again. So I think, as we prefaced earlier when we talked about the cost of water and the priority of water, I mean, nothing can operate. Life can't go on without water. You can't do business without water. You can't have, you may have a $1 million home on the top of a big hill, but if that you don't have water, and of course those aquifers are not within one county, and so we need to continue to do all we can to work together to make sure that we have water, that everyone has water, but at the same time be very respectful of private property rights in this state.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for the question. Last comment, and I got to get Dirk up here because he's going to stand in front of you in lunch. You have on your tables also a financial assistance program brochure from the Texas Water Development Board. One of the things you may be asking, and I was asked it during the break as I walked around and several people talked to me, they said, we get it. What can we do? What can we do? Here's what I'll put a plug in for the Water Development Board. If you open that booklet and you look at the front page or the first page in there, there's a dozen different programs that the Water Development Board funds for the development of water infrastructure and water planning. What you can do is tell our state legislators, we need to fund those things and fund them at a level that they've never been funded before. I mean, that's really practically what it's going to take. This water authority that we're talking about creating is going to go try to access those dollars just like the Alliance did to our south. And we're going to need a lot of funding and a lot of help from the state. So that's what you can do, is support those programs from the Water Development Board and support more funding in that direction. All right. Can you thank our panel for being here today, if you would?